Hey guys, welcome to my first look video at this BMW X1 M35i. I'm out here in very sunny Germany. I'm actually at a DTM race at the Norrisring, which is a street circuit around Nuremberg. Not to be confused with Nürburg, where the Nürburg ring is. This is a totally different city, a long way away. It's actually about an hour and a half north of Munich, and I was lucky to drive none other than an M4 CSL up here this morning, which was fun. There'll be another video coming on that very soon. This model was actually launched here today, and we had the big man, Frank van Meulen, down here to present it to the public. This is the latest M Light, although the guys and girls at BMW M were quick to point out that they're really trying to bridge the gap between, let's say, full fat M cars and what we know traditionally as M Lights. And we're going to go over what some of those reasons are shortly. Just over 4 years ago, BMW launched the X2 M35i. I remember that like it was yesterday. In fact, I borrowed one of Tony's demos, and I remember really enjoying that car. It was the first look we'd seen of what was going to become essentially today's M135i. It had the B48, it shared a lot of the underpinnings for what we're going to expect. In terms of pricing, well, it's hard to say exactly because I'm not sure that UK pricing has been completely confirmed, but I've heard on the grapevine that it's going to sit just under £50,000. This particular press car, well, I'm going to guess that it's probably going to be more like £60,000 because it has things like the pan roof, the optional M compound brakes, which look really big and aggressive in an X1, and this beautiful frozen grey paintwork. I remember I had an M340i touring earlier this year, and that had the same paintwork, absolutely gorgeous, but not for me because the upkeep on any frozen paintwork just wouldn't work. I'd be horrified and scared about small scratches and marks, but when they're clean and when they're new like this one, they look spot on, and they really show off some of the design language and the angles on this particular car. It has lots of big intakes around the front. It has the double kidney grille, which would usually only find on M cars. If you look at the door mirrors, obviously they are similar to what you'd get on a full fat M car. But remember, BMW started introducing those M mirrors on cars like the current M240i. So they really are using a lot of what we know from our traditional M cars and bringing them over onto these M performance cars. Underneath this bonnet, which is doing a pretty good job of keeping me in the shade, we'll find a familiar B48. For those of you that don't know what that is, it's a 2-litre 4-cylinder turbocharged engine, except what is connected to that B48 is slightly different in this X1 M35i. First, let's talk about the figures. So it produces 300 horsepower for the European markets, including the UK. If you're in America, you're going to get 317 horsepower, which I believe is the most that they've squeezed out of the B48. And the reasons I believe that is because the American market isn't cluttered up with things like OPF filters. So lucky them. In terms of the torque figure, well, it's 400 Newton meters, which is actually 50 down on what the current M135i is. And I think the reason for that might be because it's now mated to a different gearbox. So the Achilles 8-speed gearbox, which I didn't love and I didn't hate, it was okay, it did a good enough job, just didn't have that much character. They did improve it with the tweaked M135i that came out last year, I believe, but it still wasn't the best gearbox in the world. This actually has a 7-speed dual clutch gearbox, which really gets complicated because, as we know, BMW M are moving away from dual clutch gearboxes and using the brilliant ZF 8-speed. But with this car, well, they've reintroduced the dual clutch gearbox, and it's the same one, I believe, that you'll find in lesser 1 Series models, so cars like the 118D, the 120i, I think, etc. So I'm looking forward to seeing what that's like, because when I drove a 118D a couple of years ago at the current 1 Series launch, I remember thinking that the gearbox was really good and snappy in that, and actually quicker than the Achilles 8-speed. That is connected to BMW's xDrive system, so it's an all-wheel drive system. Remember, this is a fundamentally front-wheel drive setup, but once again, they've done a few tweaks to it to make it feel very much like, apparently, the current updated M135i, which does feel more playful at the limit. It doesn't feel like a front-wheel drive car. It feels quite equal in terms of where the power and the torque goes. In terms of performance figures, or claimed performance figures, well, BMW say this will do the 0 to 62 sprint in 5.4 seconds, which is really impressive, and I think that should be fast enough for your family bus. And it has a limited top speed of 155 miles an hour. Once again, definitely fast enough, unless you're trying to follow me on an autobahn last night in the M4 CSL, because that thing is just ballistic. But that's for another video and another story coming very soon. Let's have a look. The boot is 540 litres with the seats up and 1600 litres with the seats down. So once again, very, very practical if you're using this car as a family bus. Before we head around the back of the car, let's just talk about the suspension. Firstly, it's been lowered 15 millimeters, which obviously helps aesthetically and helps in terms of handling because that center of gravity has dropped. They've also played around with all of the settings and the dampers, etc., for this specific model. So it's a specific suspension for the M35i. It also has fitted as standard BMW's M adaptive suspension, which for the UK market especially is really important. It's something I've banged on about for years, and it just means that when you're using it as a normal car, the ride quality should be, in theory, pretty good. And when you take it down your favorite road and you ramp it up to Sports or Sports Plus or whatever they use as terminology these days, it will feel more supported and more fun down your favorite road. Let's head around the back. When you get around the side of the car, well, this one has, I believe they're the optional 20-inch wheels, because out of the box, they come with 19-inch. 245 section tyres all round, so it's a square setup. To me, it looks like a sports SUV, something like Porsche's Macan. It doesn't sit too high. It looks like it should handle pretty well, and without jumping behind the wheel and having the chance to drive it, although I did reverse it about 2 foot, but couldn't really feel the handling dynamics there. I think it should drive reasonably well because it looks wide and it looks low, and that's what you want at your sports car. So it gets the thumbs up for me in terms of styling. It's when you get around the back of the car, I think it all comes together really nicely. We've got an extended boot spoiler here. We've got a diffuser down the bottom. But in my opinion, there's no need for 4 exhaust pipes in an X1 that has a 2-litre engine. I think that is overkill. But once again, that's BMW M trying to bridge the gap between M Light and full fat M car. But I think that's overkill, as is the M badge. You know I don't like my M badges, even on full fat M cars, and that is just ridiculous. It's like it's come straight off eBay. It's way too big. So if this was mine, that would be taken off straight away. But I think with that off, it does look really good. And I think as an overall package in terms of styling, I think BMW have got this spot on. Let's jump inside and out of this 35-degree heat, because I am getting rather hot. Jumping inside, well, firstly, I have the air conditioning on, so it's a lot more pleasant than it was out there. The X1 cabin, well, I remember when I first jumped in one of these, actually at BMW Spain, when I went out there to do that long distance challenge, and I was amazed by the design and the quality, because remember, this is the sort of base model essentially, not this one. This is the flagship of the base X model. But it feels really nice in here. It feels really spacious in here. The driving position is spot on. As you can see, there's loads of headroom. I don't think you're going to take your X1 M35i out on track, but if you did, you could definitely wear a helmet, and that's with this optional pan roof. The seats, well, they are special. BMW know how to make very good sports seats, and they have done for a long time. These aren't actually leather. They look really good, they feel high quality, they're perforated as well, so they're kind of vented, because obviously if you lose leather, then probably not going to breathe as well. But most importantly, they're very comfortable and they're very supportive. And something else to note, they have illuminated M badges on them. Once again, bridging that gap between M Performance and Full Fat M. But remember, this is marketing talk and not necessarily me talking, but that's what I've been told. You know, there's all these little ingredients that they're throwing into these cars to bring them closer to the Full Fat M version. But I'm sure at night they're going to look really good, just like they do in my M3 when you unlock the car and those illuminate. The steering wheel, once again, is unique to this particular model. It's not just an M Sport wheel, it's an M Performance wheel. It has a red strip at the top, feels really nice. It must be leather because, well, it feels too good not to be. And they've introduced some proper paddles, which are basically the same paddles that I have in my M3 Touring, but they're not carbon, they're plastic. But I like that they've made an effort and they've got rid of those older paddles. These definitely feel sportier, they definitely feel more familiar to me. I talked a bit earlier on about the fact that this feels like there's loads of space everywhere. And it doesn't stop there. There's loads of practicalities. There's storage bins everywhere. I've got my phone in there. I've got two really useful bottle holders there. We've got some room underneath this center console. It's just a really usable vehicle. Obviously, we've got big door bins. We've got a good glove box there, and that all continues into the back. So I think they've really used space, or lack of space, because remember this is an X1, they've used it so well, to the point that actually, to me, it feels like I'm in a slightly bigger car than the current X3. If you do go a bit below the waistline, you find some cheaper plastics, but you find that with everything these days. In fact, that recent i7, so 7 Series, I found some cheaper plastics lower down in that car, and you're just going to have to expect that. Also, with cheaper plastics, they're not always bad because they're harder wearing. So if you're going to scuff your jeans and your clothes on there and your shoes when you step in onto the sill there, they tend to wear and clean a lot easier. So it's not all bad news. This particular car also has a head-up display, a proper one, not a traditional mini one that's like a reflective screen that sits up. So it's great to see that, but I'm sure that is going to be part of a package and potentially not come standard, as is the really cool looking Harman Kardon sound system in here. Right, next thing to do is check out this infotainment system, because it looks familiar, but it's actually something rather new. Because this is an X1, we don't have a traditional iDrive controller down here. I have some controls, namely the gearbox controls, volume controls, etc. A few stereo controls down there as well. But it's predominantly going to be using this curved display. And although the curved display to me now looks very familiar, this is yet again a new iteration. This is operating system 9, or iDrive 9. And they've integrated some really new features in here. I'm not going to go into too much detail and depth because, well, I don't really know what I'm talking about, but there are some nice features that I was showing. So for instance, in the nav at the moment, we have Munich Airport set as the destination. Now, if I wanted to stop somewhere on the way to Munich Airport, let's say to fill up with fuel, well, I just bring up this quick search menu, which is really easy to operate, and then hit the fuel button, and it will give me fuel stops along the way that are dotted really clearly for me to see. So do I want to stop straight away or closest to Munich Airport? But also I can see what the petrol stations are at a quick glance, and what they charge for premium 95 E10 fuel, which is obviously what this car runs on. And I think that's really cool, because let's face it, I am always in search of cheaper fuel, especially these days, not necessarily supermarket fuel, but cheaper fuel, because a Shell at one end of a town might be a lot cheaper than the Shell at the other end of the town. So seeing that when you're traveling on motorways, which tend to be very inflated, I think that's a great feature and function to have. And they have sped up the graphics and the usability of this system, so it should feel more like your smartphone or your iPad, etc. And I think the graphics just look a little bit sharper, but I'm looking forward to playing with this a bit more and seeing if some of the shortcuts they've introduced makes it feel a lot more normal and, let's say, old school compared to some of the touchscreen systems, which I don't believe work particularly well. Anyway, I think I've covered as much of the new X1 M35i as I can in today's first look video. Hopefully it's been interesting for you guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks a lot to BMW M for inviting me out here, especially to the DTM race. It's been absolutely awesome. I'll see you at another video very, very soon. Cheers.